No, I think enough damage has been done in the horse world. They don't need other people to do it.
Yeah.
If we're doing our job, surely, if everyone's doing their job properly, then it would be fair to say that the veterinary books would be getting lighter and lighter. The sad truth is that the medical books, as far as horses, are getting thicker. Fundamentally, we haven't had teamwork in the equine industry. We have people doing their jobs individually. Unfortunately, even the best vet in the world is only ever going to be as good as the weakest link in the chain. Science has moved on enormously. Traditional farriery has remained traditional. Farrier is both an art and a science. The day the consumer says, I can do better and I want better for my horse, and I'm not prepared to just accept mediocrity, they demand change. Change occurs. Every step it takes is forming that hoof and telling us what we need to know. I can pick up a horse's feet, 4 horses' feet, and tell you whether the horse has got a bad back, whether its teeth need attention, whether the saddle doesn't fit. That you're dealing with something that has the power. I mean, a horse can kick at 300 miles an hour. 300 miles an hour, and it will react in less than half a second. It's phenomenal power, and yet at the same time, it's so gentle. It's so forgiving. Get the very, very best out of your horse. Isn't that what everybody surely ultimately wants to do?
Welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Zach. Lovely to be here.
You're a barefoot trimmer?
That's correct, yes. I'm a barefoot trimmer.
Is it how you like to be called? What you do exactly?
Yes, there are lots of different terminologies we use, just as there are a lot of different methods. But that's what I do. I look after horses' hooves and I don't put shoes on, so therefore I'm a barefoot trimmer, yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about your journey with horses and how you ended up?
Yeah, certainly. I won't say it's unique, but I started out just as a horse lover and a horse owner. My journey evolved because, like many people, I had a horse and it ended up having problems with the hoof. And this is 20 odd years ago, and the diagnosis at the time was not good. And that just astounded me. I think people are even experienced horse owners are very ignorant of how the hoof is cared for, etc., and what the genuine knowledge and experience of those that they're paying money to look after them actually know. And I was placed in that position, and it started me on a journey that I'd never looked back. I decided to retrain and become a farrier because I wanted to, fix these problems. And I thought that the answer to fixing the problems was going to be in our new science and understanding and tools, certain different types of shoes that we could use. And eventually it led me to actually starting to understand how the hoof functions, and that in itself is the most incredible thing that you could ever imagine. We are still touching on exactly, what nature has managed to achieve in 50 million years, and it's astounding. And I've been very privileged to spend the last 20 years not only learning but also applying this and seeing the results. So my journey was different. I've always started on the basis that I love horses and that I want to do the very best I can, whatever that takes. I'm not against shoes, but I realise their limitations, and I realise over the years fundamentally why we have so many problems that we shouldn't have, that should not exist. So that's my journey, and I'm 57 now, so I've been doing this for 20 odd years. I changed career to do this, and I hope that I can do this for at least another 10 years, and learn as we all do. Every day we learn more. So, yeah, that's my journey.
I wouldn't have said that you're 57, but now that you said it, I don't believe you.
I have a passport to say it's the truth. So, yeah. But I think the trouble thing is when you wake up every morning and you go and do something that you're passionate about, that you love, it's not a job. And working with horses and being privileged enough to be able to, make a difference. I think, as you well know.
Yep, we're trying to make a difference, and the whole point of this was actually to, because we are limited into the amount of horses that we can help. But if you, for example, teach 10 people, that will make much greater impact than if you take 300, 500, 1,000 horses. You're still limited in the area where you're going.
Yeah.
And your physical abilities, like you said.
A lot of people in my profession, it's easy to move into the educating field. As you get older, as you say, it gets harder, you move into the education field. I made a conscious decision that what I wanted to do, that I would stop learning the moment I started teaching specifically.
Yes, definitely.
So I've tried to combine continuing to do my job and continuing to learn. So I kind of see it as I'm sharing. I get the opportunity. I'm not teaching people. I share what I've learned with people who are interested, which the day that I can no longer do my job, these people will be armed with what I've learned, which will hopefully save them time, but they will move on because science is moving on.
Yeah, I mean, science.
And isn't that wonderful that, all we're doing is creating a platform for people to grow. That in itself is a privilege.
And that's what I kind of felt. And I felt that there's many issues that could be prevented.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I decided to go on a journey and a quest of informing as much as I can to people who are willing to learn. Because, as you know, you can only help the people that are wanting to be helped.
Well, you're breaking down tradition. And that's a hard thing because tradition, is cemented into our society. And when you challenge it, even when you're challenging it with science, people can be reluctant, and they want proof, and they want the evidence there, and that's a responsibility. And I think we need to take that seriously, and otherwise we send people down a fool's errand, and cause more damage. And no, I think enough damage has been done in the horse world. They don't need other people to do it.
Definitely. And that's, like you said at the beginning, you're a horse lover. And as a horse lover, we are trying our best to promote the welfare of the horse.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I'm more than happy if a client of mine is about to exceed the abilities of their horse, then it's at that point that our job becomes to protect the horse. It is to protect the horse from the excessive abuse of the owner. And abuse sounds a strong word, but even through ignorance, it becomes abuse. So we can't start hugging trees and saying natural is the only way, because as humans, we sometimes exceed that capacity.
Yeah. Ignorance. That is the biggest disadvantage of the horse, is that most owners are not, the horse is just like that. No, the horse is not just like that.
Simplification, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, there was once a saying that my mentor always commented on, and it said that shoeing is a necessary evil. And he always countered that with saying it is not the shoeing that's the evil, it is the lack of knowledge that becomes the necessary evil. So with knowledge comes power, and that's what we're here to do, give knowledge.
What are the benefits of barefoot trimming, apart from...
Well, the benefits are manifold. If we're talking specifically, what are the benefits to the horse? Then obviously the fact that the hoof is able to function as nature intended, that is of enormous benefit to the horse. I don't think people quite understand that the the way the horse is built, with all the muscles high up in the body, developed over those millions of years, the hoof or the leg had to become one of the lightest, objects in order to reduce the size, the muscles that the horse would have to have. So nature's created the entire limb, especially the lower limb and the hoof. People don't realize that the pedal bone, the lowest bone, P3 in the body, horse's body, is the lightest bone because it doesn't have a periosteum, but it's also one of the strongest bones because it's taking the entire force of the horse. In order to facilitate that, nature came up with an incredible mechanism that actually makes the hoof itself like a spring, which assists and enables the horse, once it's started its sort of kinetic energy, its movement, to be able to just repeat that without excessive effort. That's phenomenal. It can run for miles without exerting vast amounts of effort to do so. That in itself. And what do? In society, we then nail a large piece of metal onto the end of it, thus totally negating its function. So from a horse's aspect, there was never a horse ever born, to my knowledge, that ever was born with shoes. It's something we have decided off our own back is beneficial and mostly beneficial to us. So what are the benefits of that for the horse? They're untold. But from what I've learned from our perspective, from the owner's perspective, the hoof it's like looking at a tree trunk. It's telling us everything we need to know. It's telling us the health of the horse. It's telling us how the horse is moving, whether it's moving in equilibrium. I can pick up four horses' feet, and tell you whether the horse has got a bad back, whether its teeth need attention, whether the saddle doesn't fit, because of the way the horse is made up and the way it moves. It's every step it takes is forming that hoof and telling us what we need to know. So from a diagnostic perspective, it's absolutely fantastic. You can't do that. If you bind a shoe or put a boot on, you prevent the wear, and that wear pattern is telling us everything we need to know about the horse and the horse's well-being. And that can save so much time. The alternative is to wait until the horse is hobbling around on three legs, and then you have to call a vet out who has 15 minutes or so to diagnose exactly what's wrong. Well, that's just insanity when we can prevent these things happening just simply by observing.
Yeah, like you said, you get to the point where you have to call a vet and it's already too late.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The vet deals with the symptom that they see, that lameness in the leg. But if that lameness in the leg has been caused from, 6 months of a bad back, they're only going to deal with the symptom. And the problem is going to persist until it breaks out in some other form. Why wait? We have that. I mean, we have, as a society, one of the gifts that I have as a hoof trimmer is that society has been educated that the hoof is important. And most people accept that they've got to get someone like myself out every 6 weeks. Nobody calls their vet out to say, there's nothing wrong with my horse, I just wanted you to admire it. You only wait and call your vet out when you have a problem. You only wait and call your saddle fitter out when somebody like myself suggests that it might be a good idea. The physiotherapist only comes out when you feel that there's something that the physiotherapist can do. And like the dentist, maybe once every 6-12 months. In my career, I am seen regularly, or I'm called upon regularly. So I'm kind of almost like the first port of call. I can look at this, I can say, that wasn't like that 6 weeks ago. Something's changed. And with the dialogue with the owner, which is crucial, because they're the ones who look after that horse every single day. They may not have the greatest experience, 7 years of experience of a vet, but they know that horse. And just by having a dialogue with that owner and saying, look, what's changed? You can start to get to the bottom of a problem that they don't even perceive as exists. That's power. That's wonderful. I mean, we can then stop something, and then when you build up a trust with your client, and you can say, look, I think you need to see a physio, or hang on a minute, has something happened to you? Did you sustain an injury? Because it's been reflected in your horse. That's just incredible. With that, we really can make a difference to, in the horse world, and for the benefit of horses, of course.
It's funny how actually the horse can actually compensate, like you said, even the rider's limitations or injuries.
One of the things they always said about farriery, and of course farriery has a long lineage, is that farriery is both an art and a science, and that's perfectly correct. But what they didn't really point out was that the science of farriery per se is mechanics. Okay, that the art is the individual person's ability to interpret that and trim the hoof and balance the foot, etc. But we shouldn't be relying upon mechanics when we're dealing with a living object. You can't apply static balance to a horse because, as you say precisely, the horse adapts. I mean, wouldn't it be a wonderful world if every trimmer, every farrier, whatever, would come out to a horse, they would trim out those feet, they would do what they were doing, putting shoes on or not, and if they had not balanced those hooves correctly, the horse would be unable to move. Well, then we'd never make mistakes. But no matter what people do, the horse will adapt. And therefore, it's easy to say what I've done is correct, because the horse shows no sign or immediate sign of, discomfort or imbalance or whatever. So, unfortunately, because the horse is not only capable but willing to adapt and compensate for our inadequacies, it leaves a very large margin for mistakes.
I have seen you working, and I have seen the comments that you have had, and without you knowing what I had, the experience I had in riding, you could clearly tell me all the how the horses were, or the limitations of the horses, and what was the next step to take. And of course, it was actually something that I had in mind, but it was nice to see that your knowledge of trimming the hooves and what the hoof tells you could actually predict that, and in good time, because
it's a lot of people have sort of said in the past, well, this person's a jack of all trade and they do it. No, I made a conscious decision not to study the physiotherapy of horses or saddle fitting or dentistry, because I felt that the trouble with that is that you then subconsciously start to place your opinions on it. By just balancing the hoof, and we could go into balancing the hoof, and if you would like to, that is in and of itself something that I think is very much overlooked. But if you balance the hoof to the pedal bone that exists, and that's important because that's where all the blood supply is, where the nerve endings become, and therefore subsequently where the proprioception of your horse, so your horse's conscious positioning of its hoof, stems from. That if you do that, then life becomes relatively simple, because after that it's simply observation. The horse wants to remain in perfect equilibrium. That is its nature. Horses do not have egos. They don't have, they cannot be fooled by placebos. They just don't have that capacity. They don't think in that way. And as such, if you balance a hoof to the conformation that exists in that animal, not to the perfect conformation that we would all love our animals to have, which they don't always have, but if you're balancing to the conformation that exists in each individual hoof, then the horse should be able to and wishes to be able to maintain that balance. And therefore, after that, it becomes a simple observation. And because I've been very fortunate to be doing this for a number of years, and because I've been incredibly fortunate to have a very large client base, that has meant to say that over time, that observation, that that, hang on a minute, the right fore has adapted, but the left fore hasn't. Okay, the opposite diagonal. Okay, we're dropping short on the hind feet, etc. From that, then comes the interpretation. You've got a fact, you know what the horse is doing, and it's not lying to you. From that, you interpret. But by not suddenly becoming an expert in physiotherapy or chiropractor, etc., I can then rely upon an expert, somebody who does specialize in that. And again, 6 weeks later, I observe. If they've done a good job and that they've fixed the problem and they've identified it, the problem has gone away, and both the horse and the client are happy. And that's teamwork, and I think that's wonderful. So, it's
teamwork, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, this is the whole thing. It's fundamentally, we haven't had teamwork in the equine industry. We have people doing their jobs individually, when actually what the owner needs is for people they can trust to work it out together and
to help in the management of the horse. A team like a vet, a farrier, a trimmer, farrier, saddle fitter, masseur or physio. So yes, definitely, that's exactly what.
And aren't we? We're spoilt now. 14 years ago when I came over to Denmark, if I said to somebody, you need to see a physiotherapist, the common thing was, yes, there's somebody that comes from Germany once a year, and no, you need to see a physiotherapist now. You can't wait a year. But now, we're spoilt for choice. We have, Tellington Touch, T-Touch people, we have chiropractors, we have physios, we have masseurs, we have everybody. And they all have a skill and a gift. We can't necessarily identify what that horse needs. It might need this, it might need that. But at least we, as a horse owners, we have that. We're lucky, and we should use that, that gift.
Exactly. Many things have happened through the last 20 years, and especially the last few years, it has been amazing. I mean, the possibilities that we're having, and all this new old knowledge, let's call it that way, that is coming back. I was actually very curious about all the parts of the hooves and their function, because I know, the hoof, yes, it's a spring, and it's but there's so much more to each part of the hoof and what it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, we can touch on that. We could go into it for days, but every single structure that when you observe when you pick up the horse's hoof. So let's say in England we talk about the frog, and then we talk about the bars, and we talk about the heels, and we talk about the quarters, and we talk about the toe. A lot of people just consider the whole hoof capsule as one entity, but it's not. And when you actually start breaking it down and looking at it closely, you realize that it's made up of different cellular structures. One of the things, obviously coming from the background that I came from, I had been convinced that when I was being a farrier, when I was doing a farrier's job, that was necessary, and that was, the correct way. And then obviously when I started learning about the science of the horse's hoof, I encountered lots of other different trimming methods, and there's like the wild hoof method, and the I'm not going to mention her name, but there's a German vet who developed her own methods, etc. There are a number of different methods, and depending on the trimmer you'll get these different methods. But it always made me wonder, it's a little bit like a snake oil salesman. When you're explaining these things to people, well, my farrier years ago was very convincing, and I believed him. And when he told me that the function of the frog was to act as a pump, I believed him. Science has caught up, and thanks to experts like Dr. Bowker, we've established that the frog does not function as a pump, and in fact, whilst it has many functions, its primary function is to allow distortion of the hoof capsule at the heels. That distortion is critical because 2/3 of that hoof is soft tissue, and it requires stimulus and movement to develop. So, but even today, a lot of people have that misconception, and sadly, even more people who own horses don't even ask the question. So, you ask me, well, what about the structures? Every single structure within that hoof is simply made up of different cells. So if you observe, next time anyone picks up their horse's hoof and they look at it, they'll see that the frog looks different to the bars, which look different to the sole, which also looks different to the inner wall, the outer wall, etc. And yet, they make up one entity. And it is precisely that fact that nature over millions of years has decided to place different cells in different positions because they play a different function. And when you take that into consideration and you realize that, okay, fine, so nature has made that frog out of squeamish cells. Why? Well, what's different to squeamish cells than other cells in the body? Well, squeamish cells are designed to absorb moisture. They're like our skin. Okay. Now we can call back on millions of years of evolution to say, okay, so obviously the frog wants to absorb moisture because it didn't need to. It could have been made up of the same, keratin horn that the outer wall is made up of. So why is the outer wall made up of a keratin horn? Well, because it's designed to protect. It's strong. Okay? So we go, okay, so the outer wall is designed to be protective. Right. Well, why do we have an inner wall that's made up of a thing called intratubular horn? And that's a glue. And that glue binds these tubules. Well, that's because nature wanted the hoof wall to also be flexible. Okay? Right, okay. So what happens when we alter the balance? Well, we provide excessive stimulation in some areas, too little stimulation in other areas, and those cells adapt. And they have to adapt because what they're looking for is to get the correct stimulus. So on the basis of that, you can start to interpret the hoof and say, right, okay, all we're looking to do when we're balancing the hoof is to ensure that those structures receive the correct pressure, not excessive pressure, not too little pressure, because both of those things will either cause damage or, become necrotic and weak. For me, that was a breakthrough because that suddenly meant to say, right, now there is no complication to this. It's not our interpretation. Oh, well, the wild horse has this model of hoof, so we just simply emulate that. No. That's perfectly acceptable for the wild horse because the wild horse is working in a completely different environment with completely different demands on the same hoof. So it is adapting to that environment. Therefore, we need to balance the hoof to ensure those structures receive the correct pressure. And from that, we have to first of all identify what is a good, healthy structure, rather than just repeating what may not be a healthy structure and interpreting it as such.
Well, we already spoke about what you can see by looking at the horse's hoof.
Yeah, but you can go into that in greater detail, and we can say, I don't think again people quite understand when every horse goes through the motion of movement. Okay, so when you're talking about the balance again, if you're talking about static balance, that's something that's not moving. But of course, that's no good if a horse moves. So what does a horse do? It goes through 5 phases of movement. First of all, the horse decides it wants to move. So it moves initiates its muscles in order to project itself forward. In a stationary motion, the horse is in balance. In order to move, it has to place itself out of balance. Okay. As its weight moves forward, it places itself out of balance, and of course the bone structure within the hoof alters and starts to lift the hoof. Yeah, so the whole thing starts to move forward. Okay, you rapidly move into the flight stage, so the hoof is in the air. Now, as the hoof comes down to make contact with the ground, literally it should, in a healthy horse, it will land on the lateral heel, so the outside heel. Okay, now at that point, everything takes off. I mean, it's just phenomenal. People don't quite realize, but the moment that lateral heel touches the ground, fireworks go off in the hoof. The bone structure starts to descend into the foot. That forces the cartilages to move out of the way. The soft cartilages have to shift to get out of the way as the pastern's descending. As they're moving out, the vein, artery and nerve, the van apparatus that's providing the blood flow, the nervous system, signals to the brain, that's starting to be squeezed. The coronary band, the frog, as we spoke about the frog allowing distortion, the frog's expanding to allow that distortion. But the bars are rigid, so they're preventing excessive distortion. So they're providing resistance. Okay, the coronary band starts to tighten. So it's not allowing that hoof capsule to get damaged and distort. So as that's tightening up, it's working against the vein, artery and nerves. The cartilages are squeezing out to allow room for that descending pastern. They end up squeezing the vein, artery and nerve. So the blood flow that would normally be flowing through the foot, that's inside the foot. As that heel touches the ground, the blood rushes towards the toe. Okay? And that's all in that 1 instant second of contact with the ground, or initial contact. And the moment then, within a millisecond, the hoof rolls over, and so the medial heel now contacts the ground. Okay? At that point, the pastern's still descending. The blood's rushed now to the toe. Okay? Now, in the process of rushing to the toe, it's reaching the capillaries. The capillaries are surrounded by nerve endings. Those nerve endings are creating signals, right? What's the blood doing? It's drawing toxin from dead tissue from the body. It's expecting to take it out. It's cleansing that hoof. But it's also a facility for excessive pressure. So excessive energy can be dissipated through the bloodstream. So it's absorbing excessive pressure. It then, having got to the toe, it can't go any further forward. The foot is now moving through to the stance phase. That's when the pastern is at its maximum distension. The cartilages are fully expanded out. The coronary band has tightened as much as it possibly can. And in the process, it's squeezed the vein, artery and nerve, shutting off the blood supply. So thanks to Dr. Pollock, we now know that there is no more blood being allowed in the foot, and no blood that's in the foot can escape the foot. But the blood's attempting to move away from the excessive pressure as that hoof is coming, as the pastern's descending, and the body weight of the horse is moving forward. It wants to get back and get out the back, the palmar aspect of the hoof, and out through the veins. The problem is it can't, because the vein is now shut off. So it's moved away from the toe, and it's moving back towards the back, but that's full. It can't get out there. So it's now located itself right beneath the pedal bone, which is bearing the entire body weight of the horse down, plus the kinetic energy, the force of the horse's landing on the ground. Okay? It's effectively erupting like an airbag to support that. A healthy sole would be 6 to 8 millimeters in thickness, which is nothing. And it's in normal circumstances, you'd say, well, if the capillaries are surrounded by nerves and you have such a massive force, wouldn't the horse scream in pain? But At the same time, nature has located the vein, artery and nerve in the same location. So as the vein and artery are shut off, so too is the nerve. So at the maximum descension, the nerve is no longer sending a signal to the brain, causing discomfort. I mean, and then as the horse moves over, breaks over, the pressure is now on the toe. Now the toe is releasing all that stored energy that when the horse landed on the lateral heel, it's twisted the hoof capsule. And the cartilages started to store up that energy. And as soon as we break over at the toe, that toe releases the energy. You know, it acts like a spring. I mean, it's phenomenal. And 90% of that is what we would negate the moment we whack a steel shoe on. And yet, isn't that amazing? And that's what we know today. That's what science has located. And a couple of years ago, Dr. Bowker discovered that in the caudal aspect, in the back part of the horse's hoof, there were these things called Pacinian corpuscles. And those Pacinian corpuscles record vibration. So the horse actually hears with its hooves. Again, I very much doubt it can do that if the hoof is bound by a shoe, if the frog's not allowed to contact the ground, etc. So, and that's something we learnt a few years ago. And elephants have Pacinian corpuscles, and they don't listen through their ears, they listen through their feet. Isn't that amazing? We so underestimate our horses and their absolute incredible abilities. And we've just, for too long, we've treated the hoof as just a hard object that we can play with and abuse as suits us. So, yeah, it is truly an amazing structure that we can talk about for days and still be amazed at.
There was a symptom that you actually commented about the hoof and the healthiness of the frog, and how you could tell through the health of the frog some other characteristics or some other problems in the horse. And
yeah, definitely. I would say a majority of hoof issues that people come across do not stem from the hoof themselves. The hoof, like your fingernail, is a very good indicator of the general health of your body. If your fingernail shines and is healthy, it's a good indicator. To that end, that's why so many people over the years, so many women paint their fingernails, because subconsciously we know that it is a sign of a health. So we treat it as such. And even in the horse world, as you well know, if people are going to go into a competition, they want to slap oil and everything onto their horse's hooves. Why? Well, because they know that that's a sign of health. The reality, of course, is what we actually genuinely want is a healthy hoof. My experience tells me that if I pick up a horse's hoof and the frog is receiving stimulus, and we know it's receiving the blood supply, but has become slightly infected, then that is an indication that the horse in itself, its natural ability to heal itself, is struggling. Okay, cracks in the hoof, etc. They can be indications of fungal infection. They can be indications of energy weakness. And you then step back, and yes, we have to deal with the symptom. That's our job. But in order to deal with it properly, it's very important to step back and have a look at the horse in whole and say, okay, fine. Is it lacking in something? Is there something else going on? What we're now starting to see, is that, I suppose like humans, we're now focusing an awful lot more than we ever used to do on the emotional aspect of horses. Horses are incredibly emotional creatures. They're herd animals, flight animals. Their whole existence survives on being in a herd. And that is something that we've not really looked at. But it plays a phenomenal part, in my experience, in how, the horse is capable of healing itself. It does have the innate ability to heal itself. It's one of the, certainly better than us in the sense that it's born with its own concept of medicine cabinet. It would search out plants that will heal it from a foal, from the age of a foal. It has that ability to do so. So it is, phenomenally important that we take these things into consideration. And I know that throws a vast sort of Pandora's box into the whole thing. But the more we start to accept that all these things play a function, and it's not that we can fix every single thing like magic, but we can use these things to observe. We can use them. And if we stop labeling horses, as I think, as you mentioned earlier, as being, it's a bad-tempered horse, or it's that's just a typical mare or something. If we can get past that and we actually say, no, hang on a minute. This is a living animal that has needs beyond simple feeding and providing with water. Then we can really start to make a difference. That's fundamental. And if we can use the hoof to guide us, to indicate that, then that's a great tool. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Is the proper hoof management helping to mainly prevent further breakdown or further bigger problems?
Yeah, with so many problems that exist in the textbooks for horses' hooves, such as navicular disease, they should not exist. If we're doing our job, surely, if everyone's doing their job properly, then it would be fair to say that the veterinary books would be getting lighter and lighter, because things like navicular disease would be a thing of a past. It'd be like rickets for human beings. That's something that people used to get years ago, but once we discovered, how to cure it, it went away. The sad truth is that the medical books, as far as horses, are getting thicker. They're not getting thinner. They're as we're finding, more medical cures and pharmaceutical cures, we're finding more problems. That shouldn't be the case. Of all the horses that I have, I don't have a single horse that suffers or now suffers from navicular disease. I've had horses that come in with navicular disease, but we know why they have navicular disease, and it is entirely due to the fact that we are protecting the hoof and not allowing the soft tissue to do its job. That's something that this should be cast into the history books and not exist. But whilst we persist in continuing to do the same thing, expecting a different result or a different outcome, and then getting frustrated because we don't get it. Well, of course we don't get it. We have to start to listen to the science, and that fundamentally is one of the biggest problems, that science has moved on enormously. Traditional farriery has remained traditional. And unfortunately, even the best vet in the world is only ever going to be as good as the weakest link in the chain. If a vet doesn't look after the horse's hoof, but they have the knowledge, but they have to rely upon somebody who has not got that scientific knowledge, not gained that scientific understanding, and is still persisting on repeating what was being done in the 70s, then you're not going to make a change. If you're going to keep on putting an egg bar shoe on a damaged hoof in an attempt to correct that, when your understanding is that it is the 2/3 soft tissue in the hoof that is crying out for stimulus, but you're going to do the complete opposite because it'll disguise the hoof and make the horse look sound temporarily. Well, nothing is going to change, certainly not going to improve. And that fundamentally has been one of the things. We have to change the industry And you can only change the industry if the demand changes. And that comes from the consumer. If the consumer accepts the same traditional answers and accepts mediocrity, there will be no change. The day the consumer says, I can do better and I want better for my horse, and I'm not prepared to just accept mediocrity, they demand change. Change occurs. And I talk to too many people who say, oh, my farrier turns up when my farrier wants to turn up. Oh, what other industry would accept that? That's ridiculous. But it's traditionally done. So.
With what I know now, exactly, they were going to put bar shoes on her on the hind legs. And then I was like, yeah, well, that's exactly what they're going to do.
Then they'll stick a wedge in, and then they'll use gel. There are only a few things in the little black bag, and they haven't really fundamentally changed. There's still people are still very keen to stick a egg bar shoe on, or stick a wedge in, or stick some gel pads in, or then we can use steroids, painkillers, anti-inflammatories, all these sort of things. But really, all they're trying to do is disguise the issue. Then no one wants to face up. And to be fair, the moment you whip a set of shoes off a horse, you're opening a Pandora's box. You really are, because you suddenly, a horse trotting away happily on 4 shoes loses a shoe and it's hobbling away, and they go, oh yeah, my horse needs shoes because it's lame without. No, you've got a lame horse that you're disguising with a shoe. It's just unable to be disguised when the shoe falls off. Why don't you make a sound horse? There's nothing wrong with putting a shoe on a sound horse. There never has been. It's the fact that we insist on disguising a problem. Better to, in my view, rather than wait for this creeping, as you say, it starts off with a couple of days and then it goes on to a week and then maybe 2 weeks and 3 weeks until ultimately it's pretty much lame all the time. And then we go, okay, well, we'll put a bigger shoe on. So that'll be the answer, one that'll reduce any movement within the hoof. That's your answer to do it. Well, it might work. But, as everyone asks, if you took a standard rim shoe and you replaced it with an egg bar shoe, and the difference, suddenly the horse trots down the road. I mean, what is it with the egg bar shoe? I mean, has it got like pixie dust in it? Is it magical? It makes something? No, all it's doing is exactly what it says on the tin. It's binding the caudal aspect of the hoof so that soft tissue that was moving a little bit, it was expanding, it wasn't distorting, but it was expanding, is no longer able to expand. Well, no feeling, no pain. Great. But I'm not sure we wouldn't accept that with our children. If you took your child to the doctors and they said, it's all right, your child's in pain, but I've just given it morphine, you'd probably go, hang on a minute. But we're really thrilled and we're happy to write a big check or, pay large sums of money. Oh yeah, my farrier's great. He's put some, I know a farrier, or met a farrier who started with egg bar shoes. He didn't even bother with rim shoes because his concept was they're probably all going to end up in egg bar shoes anyway. So let's just stick egg bar shoes on. It's weird. It's a weird concept, but one I don't and have never ascribed to, and I never will ascribe to. But yeah, I see it happening.
Can performance horses be without shoes and perform?
So, well, as a performance horse, of course, we're demanding ever more and more from our animals, just as we do of our own of humans. Yeah, I mean, as I've said before, the horse's hoof is just a phenomenally, incredibly amazing structure. But like every other aspect of the horse, we can exceed that and we can cause damage. And if there is a way that we can protect our horses, well, then there's nothing wrong with that. But that has to be based on knowledge, not on just desire and demands on the horse. So, yeah, I personally have not really found any limitations on what horses are capable of doing. So if someone said to me, I've got a carriage horse, can I go barefoot? Well, yes. Yes, I have evidence of many, many clients working carriage horses without shoes. Jumping horses, well, depending on the environment. If you're dealing with a horse on, if you're wanting to jump 5-6 foot on wet ground, you know what? Your horse isn't going to want to do that. It's not stupid. It's perfectly aware. There was a study done that if you were to take a damp cloth and you place it under your horse's right front hoof, within minutes, the temperature on the left front hoof has adjusted to balance with the right front hoof. That is how sensitive the horse is. It uses those structures and that proprioception to understand the environment it's working on. So if you're wanting it to do something that is reckless and stupid, I personally, you might be able to do that, but you probably won't win the competition because it's going to protect itself. Well, I don't know how you get around that issue, but then that's not my job to do.
Obviously, it's exactly what I think, but of course, people are, like human beings, not everybody is a top athlete.
Oh, come on, 99% of them are. Very few reach that top.
Exactly, and we just need to make some sense into, of course, the limitations of each one and the training that each one gets. The same way that I remember you commented that you should actually train on the environment that you're going to be demanding your horse in. For example, if you want to go hiking, well, you just make sure that you make your horse walk.
Yeah, I would say that's probably one of the fundamental flaws that people, mistakes people make when they decide to go barefoot. They don't take that interpretation. They go, oh, my horse will wear its hoof too much. It'll wear down to nothing. It's based on that lack of understanding that the environment plays in the hoof.
Is there a way of training the hoof to perform on different surfaces, or do you recommend some?
Well, yeah. Yeah, personally, I don't ascribe to this concept of the necessity of it is environmental. So whatever that horse, what environment that horse spends most of its time on, is the way the hoof develops. So if a horse stands on concrete all the time, or works on concrete all the time, or asphalt, the foot will adapt to accommodate that. If a horse stands in a field or nearly all its life, it will adapt to that. It is constantly adapting to nature and to its environment. If you were to take a horse in Saudi Arabia, that becomes a different environment and it adapts to that environment. It's the same hoof. I think I mentioned before that the Camargue ponies in France are walking around in water all the time. The hoof just simply adapts to that environment as the horses in Denver, Colorado, and the horses in London. They're always adapting to that environment. As I say, the problem is that people aren't really understanding that 99% of the time, most domesticated horses are standing in a field. But most owners don't tend to ride their horses in a field. Most owners go down roads, they go into the woods, they go on the sand schools. But how long do they do that for? Isn't it a little bit like, when you ask people, how many units of alcohol do you drink? And they say, 2, when they're really drinking 5. Well, it's almost like the reverse. When you say, how much riding do you do with your horse? Oh, well, I do, 5 or 6 hours a week. Well, it actually transpires into being 1 hour a week because they're very busy. Most farriers would agree that actually nowadays they're taking shoes off the horse, balancing the hoof or trimming the hoof, and then sticking the shoe back on again because they haven't worn the shoe. Very few people wear the shoe out, which just shows, well, why are you putting it on there if then you're not even using the horse? Because we become busy, but we want the facility to know that we can go out when we want to without having to put in the physiotherapy, the education, the training to do so. And that fundamentally is one of the biggest problems we have. Therefore, when you've taken the shoes off your horse, or you're taking a youngster and you're wanting to train it, you have to expose it to the environment. And you have to be consistent, because nature will only respond to consistency. So by doing it regularly, not overdoing it initially, because that just causes bruising or, issues, then nature responds by saying, oh, I get it. This is my new environment. You don't have to go and do a paddock paradise at vast cost and change your entire environment so that this horse is constantly. You just have to have consistency. So people shouldn't ever feel the limitation. Oh, well, I don't have the money, or the yard that I have tells me I can do. Well, just you can get your horse out onto an asphalt surface, and you start with 30 minutes, and you build up that horse. And if you do it consistently, the foot will adapt and respond. But I would think that's probably no different to training a horse.
Exactly. I mean, you cannot start training a horse for 1 hour. You have to start gradually and increasing, and basically working mind first, and then the body will follow, like I say, and then without tension. It should avoid tension and overexertion. So it applies for every aspect.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter has piano lessons, and as I constantly say to her, well, you can't expect to make a change if you're only spending 20 minutes a day in front of the instructor playing the piano. But if you go back home and you practice and you practice and you practice, before you know it, it'll get there. That's what we do. But I don't know, is it people are lazy? They don't want to put the practice in. They don't want to be consistent. But you only get the results in life, or the genuine results, if you're consistent.
Unfortunately, yes, consistency, and people give up very quickly.
They do, and that's one of the flaws, isn't it? But it's easier to bang a set of shoes on. Well, yeah, of course it is easier, but it's not better. No one ever said it's better. They all say, they say shoeing is a necessary evil. No, it's not. It's not a necessary evil. Let's get rid of that idea. Shoeing is a choice.
How much do you actually ride a horse, and how much is the management around it? The more I know about horses, the less time I'm actually riding the horse, unfortunately. And it's all about management all around the horse to make sure that the horse is happy, so that they will be sound and this. But people forget about that. They just want to concentrate on the riding and making sure that every time they want to ride or can ride, that the horse is sound. And that's what it comes down to, the shoeing part. And yeah, well, it should be the opposite, which is make sure that your horse is sound, and make sure that the management around it is, and that you give enough attention to make sure that everything is fine. And then the riding will come, and then you will enjoy the riding as much as the horse is enjoying it.
I once had a customer, a lovely lady, and she was very much into dressage. And when I first met her, her horse had shoes on and everything. And she said, I've reached a position. She said, I can't go any higher in the dressage. The numbers I get now locked. She said, because my horse is lame on the right hind. And she said, my instructor has taught me that every time my horse engages the right hind, I need to just, kick with my heel to get it to engage. And I remember looking at it and saying, well, but if you know your horse is lame, why don't you fix it? I mean, surely that, to me, is the most logical thing. Well, fix the problem, and then you haven't got to cover for it. But she'd been convinced by her farrier at the time that the horse had such lovely gait, it's a lovely elongated gait, that they were worried that the horse would lose that gait if they took the shoes off. And I said to her, well, I can only help you if first of all, we can take the back shoes off so we can identify where the problem exists from, whether it's in the hoof, whether it's higher up. And then if you work with me and we can get the correct person to come in and do the job, well, within 8 weeks, we had the horse sound. And we'd set it up, so I said to her, I don't mind if you put the shoes back on. It doesn't bother me. I just can't help you until I've identified where the problem is, etc. And then with the use of a very, very good physiotherapist, they fixed the problem. She never put the shoes back on. In fact, she took the fronts off, but that wasn't the relevant factor. The point was that suddenly the points that she was getting got better and better and better until she got first place. I can never understand why you didn't go straight to that answer instead of assuming that what we had to do was patch up something that was damaged in order to just persist. Why? Why cover up? What's the point? But she was actually being taught to cover it up. And that's a tool. Oh, we can do that. Like we can use spurs, or we can use whips, or we can do something to force our horse to comply. But as you kind of inferred, well, why not put the effort in to build up the bond with your horse, to understand the limitations of your horse because of things, to fix the problems, and not have to go through that, and then get the very, very best out of your horse? Isn't that what everybody else surely ultimately wants to do?
The empathy that I have towards the horse. I'm like, it's not the horse's fault. I just need to figure out where the hell is it having pain, and how can I help it?
But when as human beings, when you've been injured, you're nervous. You're now walking into a situation that the horse regrets as much as you do, but you're walking in going to a flight animal, I don't trust you. Subconsciously. Well, you've set yourself back 10 paces. That never needed to happen.
It's the whole management around the...
I had an experience recently where I was asked to go to a veterinary surgery and deal with a horse that was a client of mine. And the vet rightly said, it's been 6 weeks. I need you to get your trimmer out to rebalance the feet because they're not balanced. They're way off. So she called me out, and I looked at the horse and I said, well, you're right. This horse has flares, etc. I said, but the horse has got a bad back. So the reason the flares are there because it's got a bad back. So we need to fix the bad back. The vet came out and we discussed this, and she said, but we need to rebalance the foot. I said, well, yeah, that's what I'm here for. I'll rebalance the foot, but I can promise you that if that's the only thing I do, within a matter of weeks, the foot will be out of balance again. Bless her, the vet took it on board. Once I balanced the feet, she worked with the horse, she trotted it up, she identified that it had a bad back, she treated the bad back. 6 weeks later, the horse is perfect and its feet are balanced. That is the teamwork. It's just the, working together to say, look, there are limitations to what I can do. I can balance the foot, but if the horse can't maintain that balance, it will not maintain that balance. But if you can fix what you're capable of fixing, it's outside my realm, then together we've got a sound horse, and the owner is thrilled. She's got back the horse that she had before. It's working perfectly, and that was simple. And that's that's what we need to be doing every day. That's what we need to be working together. Get rid of the egos and just start saying, right, together as a team, we can fix problems.
As you commented before, sometimes hoof cracks. What causes actually?
Again, like all things, hoof cracks being simplistic, there are different types of hoof cracks. You've got sand cracks. Now, a sand crack is it's fungal spores on the outer hoof. It's cosmetic, purely cosmetic. They create little lines down the hoof, usually down the centre of the hoof, but they can create them all around the hoof. They can get quite deep. Almost like abraded away by sand, which is why they're called sand cracks. And that being fungal can be treated, with the colloidal silver to get rid of that. You also have grass cracks. Now, a grass crack is simply where mud or usually a stone has started to penetrate between the outer wall and the golden line, and it penetrates and separates the joint. Now, it'll just keep crawling its way up. So that's a different type of crack. They used to do what we call laddering, cutting a line. It doesn't work for grass cracks because it's coming from the inside, so it just penetrates. But But you also have quarter cracks. But now quarter crack is formed by something. Usually a quarter crack will form because the heel angle, the heels will start to become underrun, which is, if certainly in a shod horse, that's very difficult for a farrier to deal with when the heels start to be pulled underneath. But the farrier can dock to the toe, so they can keep the toe in the right position. But the tubules from the heel are now going in a different alignment to the toe, and they create a weak spot. That can cause a quarter crack. But going deeper, we also see very light quarter cracks that can appear in the hind feet, which we're now starting to realize. Now we refer to Chinese medicine, and that's when you start to identify that this could be weaknesses in the organ, within the horse, so liver, kidneys, something like that. You'll usually tell that because they'll be identical on, say, both hind feet. So now you're getting into acupuncture and things, which is another thing altogether. But again, they're all genuine, and they're all, the horse has the innate ability to want to keep the hoof, which is an important factor in the horse, healthy and sound. But if the vital organs within the horse are compromised, or the horse generally becomes unwell, or as we touched on, the psychological aspect of the horse, we will start to see symptomatic issues. And that is an ongoing thing. That's something we need to look at more. But equally, the metabolic situation of a horse. When people say, oh, my horse is quite sensitive, and that can be periodical. You can have a horse that's beautifully sound for years, and then suddenly starts to get a bit footy. Right? Invariably, that's a metabolic issue. That's the gut processing things. And you'll find that in most cases, it is associated with, ulcers, which by dint are associated with stress. Or it can be, linked to, runny stools, things. Generally just, a gut that's not functioning. And, a little bit like a laminitic, laminitis stems, grass-based laminitis stems from a gut issue, overload. Of carbohydrates and fructans and sugars and things like that. But it's that gut that's not functioning correctly that then creates the toxins, that then creates the issues. So again, I go back to it, the hoof itself is a wonderful record, because it grows slowly and because it's adapting constantly. It's telling you, it's all the time, it's telling you, if you just observe and not just dismiss it, which fundamentally we have done for too long. So, we don't have every answer. I wish we did, but we have a lot more answers than we had 15 years ago. And God willing, we're going to have a lot more answers over the next 5 or 10 years. So, as we unravel this, it just enables us even more to just do a better job and to keep our horses sound and happy and save ourselves money and just improve the lot for our horses.
We were speaking about balancing the hoof, but how important is it, the angles and, for example, the front and the back? You also spoke about the...
Yeah. Okay. So traditionally, when we talk about balancing the hoof, you're simply talking about angles. So you want the pastern angle to the hoof capsule to follow the pastern angle. When we pick up the hoof, we want the medial lateral balance to follow the cannon bone within the foot, etc. It's an incredibly simplistic concept of balance. In fact, in Hickman's Farriery in the UK, which is the Bible for farriers to work with, it covers 1.5 very small pages balance in the hoof. It always amazes me when we talk. I mean, everyone who trims a hoof, or farriers, etc. They're always saying, "Yes, I've balanced the hoof." I mean, I think most people would I employ my farrier to balance my horse's hooves, or my trimmer to balance the horse's hooves. But when I always ask the question, "Well, what do you mean by balance?" most people can't answer that. It's if you talk about the AANCHP wild horse model, where they're simply following a model of a horse and saying, well, that suited the wild horse, and the wild horse never has somebody trim it, so that must be the correct balance of the hoof. Again, it's a simplistic answer to it. That would be like saying, every human should just simply have a size 8 feet or something, and therefore we'll just create shoes for every human to do that. No. Horses are different. Every horse is different. But fundamentally, when we're talking about balance, what we should be talking about is balancing to the bone structure. And I think I mentioned before that the bone structure is where the horse's proprioception stems from. So whatever you do, whatever anybody does to trim a horse's hoof, the horse can only respond by placing its hoof where its brain tells it its hoof should be. The best analogy of that is, if I were to scratch my nose with my finger, I can do it with my eyes closed because my proprioception within my finger identifies, thanks to my brain, where my finger is in relation to my body. Yeah, so I can close my eyes, I can scratch my nose. I can even do that after I've had a few beers. Now, however, if I allow my fingernail to grow to a point, because since my fingernail does not have any nerve endings in it, to a point, where it's incredibly long, I would go to perform the same maneuver and poke myself in the eye. Right? There's nothing wrong with my proprioception. It's just that unfortunately it can't decipher, where the nail is around it. The horse suffers from the same issue. So, as such, we have to, when we're talking about balance, what we really, really fundamentally want to do is to balance that individual hoof to the bone structure that exists within that particular hoof. And I say that because, obviously, conformationally, as much as we would like every horse to be conformationally perfect, that does not exist any more than it exists in any human. But that in and of itself should not alter the horse's ability to function. As long as we balance the hoof to the bone structure that is sending the signal to the horse's brain that allows the horse to function. So it's a completely different concept of balance as opposed to something aesthetically that we would prefer to see. And the danger, of course, of that with farriers is that if you're a farrier who predominantly works on racehorses that are thoroughbreds, that have a much steeper pastern and scapula, and then you go to work on a shire horse, they are completely different because one has a much steeper scapula and or much more upright scapula, and therefore upright pastern. And when the traditional farriers say, "Oh yeah, well I always follow that, and I look at the angle for that, and I do this and that." Yeah, fine, but when you go to the hind feet, how do you follow the scapula? Because it doesn't have one. So what medium are you using to balance in your traditional method, since you don't have that tool? And if anyone takes a horse and just asks the horse to move, its body weight, you'll see that the pastern moves. The angle of the pastern moves. Well, then how would you use that as a relevant thing? And, if you were to say, no, well, let's look at the wild horse. Well, if you're going to use the wild horse as your balance, but the wild horse doesn't carry any weight. It actually has a ground parallel pedal bone because it's usually around about 15 hands. It's very light. It's designed to work over a different terrain. And it's adapted its hoof for that terrain, which is perfect for that horse in that terrain, but it is not functioning for a domesticated horse that we've bred to be completely different and have a different function. So when we're talking about balance, we have to go back to saying, right, what we want is performance. And if we want performance, then we have to enable the horse, which is going to use its proprioception. It will use nothing else. So aesthetically making something more pleasing to our eye is not performance. In fact, it's disenabling our horses.
Can you help fix any hoof at any age? Or is it limited to a certain age that you can maybe, because it was younger, or because according to what you just said, basically, as long as the soft tissues are not totally damaged, you can still kind of help it.
Absolutely. There's nothing in the horse's hoof, and by that I mean to say there are three different types of tissue. There's static tissue, which is bone. There is soft tissue, of course, which is all the cartilages and ligaments, etc., within the hoof, and then there is soft tissue. Then there is the static tissue, which is your hoof capsule. All of them are changing. All of them go. So obviously, soft tissue changes very rapidly. So cartilages can, as soon as you give stimulus to cartilages, a little bit like a muscle, it immediately starts to heal. It can deteriorate very quickly as well. Our static tissue, our bone tissue. Should have explained that better. The bone structure, the static tissue, changes. We know arthritis is a bone change. Yeah. Our soft tissue is our soft tissue, it's our muscular tissue that changes. And our dynamic tissue, which is the horn capsule, the hoof capsule, we know grows. It grows slower, though. It can take, 6, 12 months to grow a new horn. But it's adapting, it's growing. So there's nothing, absolutely nothing in the horse's hoof that is not adapting and changing. Okay? So a young horse, the deterioration will be relatively limited because it's young. An older horse will have had years to alter. If someone asks me to take a horse in its 20s that's had shoes on most of its life, and they say, I want to take the shoes off and change it, well, the first question that I would be asking is why? I mean, is it unsound? Is there a reason for doing this? Because, as I've mentioned before, you're going to open a Pandora's box. So, do you want to do that? I mean, yes, you probably over time it can change. But if it's taken 10 years to deteriorate and it's starting to get some arthritis, you're starting to get a bit of ring bone, is it the wisest thing to do? And why are you doing it? I mean, we have to be sensible about that. So, yes, I do believe that things can change. But as I've also mentioned, that an awful lot of the problems of the hoof come from problems in the body. And again, as the horse gets older, I've met a very good physiotherapist who said, I am not prepared to change that because it will cause discomfort for the horse. It has developed it over so many years. Trying to undo it is not a necessarily nice thing to do. So I think we have to take that into consideration. I think we have to, look at that as an important part and say, yes, okay, we probably can change it, but unless there's a good reason to, maybe we shouldn't. And if it's a mare in foal, would you want to cause any chance of discomfort? The answer to that would be, to my way, no, don't do it until such time as at least the mare has given birth, is not carrying so much weight, is in a better position to actually, fix itself, assist itself, and it's not putting 90% of its energies into the foal. So I think everything's reserved. I think you just got to put it in proportion and say, okay, is this the right thing to do? Is it the best time to do it? Yeah. And I think that's the same with clients. If a client wants to take the shoes off a horse, then they have to accept that they are going to have to compromise their demands on the horse and give the horse the sufficient physiotherapy to heal. If that is not within their capabilities because of their job, their family life, etc., the time of year, then don't do it until you're in a position that you can actually give the horse that consistency that it's going to require if you want to see a change. That's just being sensible.
especially if you have slapped the shoes on, trying to hide.
Exactly. You know there's a problem.
That's the biggest problem.
Yeah.
The problem has become so big.
Yeah.
That
The answer, you can't just take the shoes off and throw it in a field and expect nature to do the rest for you. No, it doesn't work that way. If you've been complicit in destroying the soft tissue structure within the hoof, you have to be proactive to reverse that. And if you're not prepared to be, then don't take that step. It's not fair on the horse. So
there is certain cases that I have met through my experience and my years of writing. It's club feet.
Mm-hmm.
What can you do about it? Or
okay, so what is a clubfoot? And a clubfoot is effectively where the pedal bone that exists within the foot is no longer in the correct position, because the deep digital flexor tendon that operates it from behind is attached through the carpal tunnel in the effectively the knee to the deep digital flexor muscle. Now, if the deep digital flexor muscle is working properly, then the deep digital flexor tendon, when the horse is at rest, is defined as being at 100%. So it's not elastic. It is like fibers. Okay. It has 21% flexibility. Okay, so the way the horse functions is that the brain tells the horse it wants to move, the muscle tightens, that pulls on the tendon then lifts the back of the pedal bone. As for the front, you have the extensor tendon, and that extensor tendon does the same thing. It's attached to the extensor muscle. And that enables the horse that has no muscles down the lower part of its limb to operate. Now, when you're looking at a horse with boxy feet or a boxy foot, what is actually happening there is that the muscle is not relaxing. So the lactic acid in the muscle is not allowing the muscle to relax. So that 21% that normally the horse would have within the tendon is being reduced. Now, when you consider that a healthy horse running along, galloping along quite happily, will utilize that tendon to 118%. Okay, that allows 3% margin. Okay, not a lot. So it's actually using most of its ability to stretch, and that's in a healthy horse with a balanced hoof, just doing what horses do. Okay. The problem is when the muscle tightens and doesn't give, it doesn't relax completely, then the tendon is under constant tension, and that is uncomfortable. That's really uncomfortable for the horse. So what the horse will endeavour to do is it will attempt to throw down heel. By throwing down heel, it can compensate for that margin. Okay, but in doing so, it alters the alignment of the foot. If you go in and and you're looking to rebalance the hoof and you hack off the heels, if you cut them back down again so that aesthetically now that hoof is looking good, what you're actually doing is returning that shortage in the tendon. And eventually what will happen is that the caudal aspect, the back of the pedal bone, will start to incline. So it's a bit like the reverse of a foundered horse, which is where the laminitic, where the pedal bone drops through the sole. This is the same, where the tip of the pedal bone is fine, but now the back of the pedal bone is being literally hauled up into the back of the foot. And because the pedal bone then has its laminar attachment, and then its intratubular horn, and then its tubules, as it does so too the whole shape of the hoof goes upright. Okay, that's a boxy foot. Now, again, you have to define. Now, there are genetic incidents. So a mare can give birth to a foal that has a boxy foot. That's usually due to things like liver damage in the mare. Okay, that's a genetic issue, and I personally haven't seen very many successful results. A lot of times the vets will have to go in and they'll sever the tendon to release it and things like that. That's when you would require veterinary change. If it comes down to a simple matter of muscular contraction that's causing it, or in foals where you have the bones and the soft tissues don't always grow at the same speed. That's very common, but you'd see that in both front feet invariably. That's really the tendency. It's just a natural, the body's growing quicker, the bones are growing quicker, especially we see it in foals that come out, quite large and things like that. Well, that's okay. That will just simply naturally readjust, etc. But again, you can see that because what you're not seeing when you look at the frog is you're not seeing a contraction. You're not seeing that bone being hauled up in the back. You're just seeing that simple change where that 21% of natural allowance is unfortunately being outraced by the bone growth. And then that's fine. I mean, then the best way to deal with that one would be just simply to stimulate, just get the horse moving gently onto a hard surface, etc., encouraging the soft tissue structures to stretch and grow and do what nature intends it to do. So yeah, I mean, if you're dealing with a genuine box foot, okay, that's a different issue altogether. But I'd certainly say that you would be tending to see in a horse that is probably nearly a year old. I would never particularly be concerned on a youngster that's 2, 3, 4 weeks old. That I would interpret as being just natural, and you observe it. And you wouldn't. I wouldn't ever do remedial trimming on a youngster like that, because remembering that hoof that you're actually looking at is correct for that horse, given the situation. Never underestimate that. It may not be aesthetically perfect, but it isn't aesthetically perfect because the horse is unable to maintain that at that moment in time, at which point we have to look further than the hoof and we have to say, okay, but why? What can we do to encourage that change, rather than say, no, we'll start the engineering change in the hoof and expect something much deeper and much more technical to occur up in the body. No, start with the body and work with the hoof.
That's what the intake of the intake of your talk today has opened up so many aspects of things that I didn't really fully understand, but now I totally see it. Makes sense, and I understand that every single thing that you see through the hoof, there's something higher up that
is triggering it. Yeah. We've been so focused on the hoof, focused on the foot, that we've tended to ignore the connection. Simplification. It's not always the wisest thing to do. So, but yeah. See, it's a great journey, and we're only partly through it. This is going to carry on, and we're going to learn more, and we're going to get better at this. And this is great, isn't it? What a wonderful job.
Yeah, because one other thing that for me, I mean, a horse was basically muscles and hooves. I was like, no hoof, no horse.
Yes, that's right. Isn't that
all right? Yeah, but no hoof, no horse. It's a bit more complicated than that. And we have, like you said, there's organs, there's fascia, there's skin or hair, the same as the brain. And so it's much more complicated than what we have been seeing things. So,
but that shouldn't frighten us. That's the lovely thing, is that should excite us, because that means to say that we really can go deeper and deeper, and we can unlock, and we can have happier horses, we can have sounder horses, but you can have that connection that isn't it, most people want. They want that connection. They buy into the idea of, they want to join the Pirelli club or something because they want their horse to love them. They want their horse, that bond. Horses are healing creatures, and people fall in love with them. And then having this scope, having this ability to go, actually we can go further. We can delve deeper. We can really get that bond with our horse. It is an opportunity, not a frustrating, technical science.
Exactly. That's what you like. You always pinpoint exactly what I have been thinking all these years. Is that yes, it's a healing. A horse is a healing creature, and has helped so many people. One of me, but the will that I have to give back to this creature has made me open my eyes and try to look and investigate and try to find more knowledge to help this beautiful creature that we all love.
Yeah. Isn't it? I think it's wonderful that, if you look back 100, 150 years ago, and a horse was used predominantly as a tool for ploughing, carriage driving. And then if you leap forward after the Second World War, where there was, the decimation of horses, etc., and suddenly horses made a comeback in modern Western society. But as a sports and leisure, as a pleasure, competing, jumping, 3-day eventing, again as a tool. And then you leap forward another 40, 50 years, and more and more, horses are being used for therapy. They're being used to treat people with mental issues and structures. That was always the horse's gift. It's just taken us hundreds of years to finally appreciate that, you're dealing with something that has the power. I mean, a horse can kick at 300 miles an hour. 300 miles an hour, and it will react in less than half a second. It's phenomenal power, and yet at the same time, it's so gentle. It's so forgiving of the abuse that we give it, And I think people are finally coming around to realizing it is exactly those skills or gifts that the horse has that make it so unique. And yeah, it's now commonplace to use horses for therapy. And that's, I think, they've been patient enough to let us go through every other motion. It's a bit like I always said of the Americans. You can always trust the Americans to do the right thing once they've exhausted every other possibility. I think it was Winston Churchill. And it is so true, Well, I'm not saying it's true of the Americans, but it is so true of the horses. It's been very, very forgiving of us, whilst we slowly came round to the understanding that actually its greatest gift is yet to come.
Thank you so much, Ian.
My pleasure. Lovely to meet you.
Pleasure in talking to you, and also giving us a little bit of your knowledge.
It's always a pleasure. It's our job to share, and I hope it's given some of your podcast members something to think about.